Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are wrestling with a document that is so highly charged, so challenging to the status quo, that it hasn't even been officially published. It's this powerful draft circulating within the deepest corridors of the Vatican.
That's right.
We're plunging into the analysis in this potential new encyclical, Dignitas Omnium, the dignity of all.
And this deep dive is, it's less about official church doctrine as it stands now and more about a really uncompromising internal look at the Catholic Church's most profound and I'd say damaging conflict.
Okay.
You have a stack of sources in front of you that all point to this one central tension. On one hand, the Church bases its entire moral foundation on the inviolable dignity of every single human being. It's a universal mandate.
Whereas on the other hand,
it rigidly maintains structural laws, theological doctrines that systematically exclude women, LGBTQIA plus individuals, and anyone with a diverse gender identity from leadership and, from sacramental equality.
and the document pretty much asks, how long can you tolerate this fundamental tension between universal dignity and structural exclusion? How long before the whole edifice of the Church's credibility just comes crashing down? So our mission today is really a crash course in that internal battle. We're going to unpack the theology, the sociology, and what's most surprising to me, the really radical legal arguments in this massive draft proposal.
Exactly. And the source material frames it perfectly. It says the Church's claim to speak credibly on social justice, on human rights on the world stage is, it's fatally undermined when half the human population, women and other sexual minorities, are still structurally marginalized inside its own walls.
And this conflict plays out across three critical fronts, which the draft explores.
It does. First, there's the huge intellectual challenge from modern gender theory. Then you have the historical momentum of feminist movements inside the Church, which just won't be stopped. And finally, this looming legal showdown over universal human rights.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking the definitions, because the Church's entire structure is, it's predicated on a very strict, very fixed, binary view of creation. We have to understand the intellectual basis that's challenging that.
We do. The real genesis of this conflict lies in a distinction that became absolutely critical in the 1970s. It was introduced by the British sociologist Anne Oakley, and it's the distinction between sex and gender.
Yep.
Sex is defined very narrowly as the biological reality, so the physical stuff, the characteristics, chromosomes XX, XY hormones, reproductive anatomy.
And gender. That's where all the complexity comes in.
Yes. Gender, as it's understood in modern sociology and in this draft's analysis, is the social and cultural construct. It's the entire network of assigned roles, identities, and crucially, the power structures that society, history, and culture impose on those biological facts.
So what it means to be a man or a woman.
Exactly. What it means to be a man or woman in any given era is so much more than a biological fact. It's a social phenomenon. It's a learned identity that, it deeply permeates everything about power and how we coexist.
This distinction immediately puts immense pressure on that foundational text of creation, Genesis 1.27. Male and female, he created them. And now that one single word, and, has become the site of this intense theological warfare.
It carries the weight of 1,000 years of interpretation. I mean, the sources highlight two dramatically different ways you can read that and.
Okay.
The traditional, the conservative interpretation sees that and as enumerative. It just means two distinct, separate, complementary sexes, each with their own fixed, God-given roles, all part of an unchanging order of creation.
So it emphasizes difference in function, even if it claims equality and, spiritual dignity.
That's the idea. But the Reform interpretation argues for something much, much more radical, a connective and.
A connective and. Now, hold on. Isn't that massively overinterpreting a single word? How on earth do Reform theologians defend such a radical reading?
Well, they argue the Hebrew structure implies a unified whole that's being described in two parts. It suggests a both hybrid concept.
A hybrid.
The idea is that both male and female characteristics, like yin and yang, or the ancient idea of a spiritual androgyny, are present in every single human being, at least to some degree. The absence of the word or is critical. If creation is a hybrid, then the strict division of roles based on sex, that's a human construct, not a divine one.
And that would rewrite 1,000 years of history. It suggests a spectrum, or at least a full integration, instead of a rigid division.
Potentially, yes.
Which makes the resistance from the church hierarchy completely understandable. If gender is a spectrum or a hybrid, then the whole structure of the male priesthood, which is built on those fixed male roles, It just collapses.
Exactly. The draft notes Pope Francis has repeatedly warned against this. He sees gender theory as an ideology or even an ideological colonization.
Right. The concern among conservative critics, as you see in the source material, is this fear of losing what they call anthropological truth, the divinely revealed truth about humans as complementary men and women. They're afraid that if gender is just socially constructed, then the physical reality of being a man or a woman becomes meaningless.
And people can just choose their gender at will, negating any difference at all.
That's the core fear. It's seen as destroying the complementarity that secures the traditional family and, of course, the traditional power structure of the church.
And the reform critique immediately comes back and says that fear is based on denying the complexity of biology itself.
Which is the second key point of conflict. Science confirms that biological reality is already way more diverse than the church's binary framework allows. Hashtag tag 1.2 biological reality beyond the binary.
Let's get into that science, because the traditional assertion we hear all the time is so simple. Biologically, there are only two sexes, XX for female, XY for male. The sources are crystal clear that scientifically this is a dangerous oversimplification. It is. And the draft uses that scientific evidence to directly challenge the church's adherence to this simple binary. Biological sex isn't, a one-dimensional trait defined just by chromosomes. It's multidimensional.
It's an interplay of different factors.
An interplay of chromosomes, gonads, hormones, anatomical structure. And when you look at that interplay, variants beyond the strict XXXY dichotomy are absolutely present in the human population.
Can you elaborate on those variations? I think for a lot of our listeners, this might be a bit unfamiliar.
Sure. We're talking about scientifically documented chromosomal variants. So you have Klinefelter syndrome, which is XXY, an individual with an extra X chromosome. Turner syndrome is XCPA, so they only have one X. Then there's XYY, XXX, various mosaics, where different cells in the body have different patterns.
Or even SRY translocations.
Right, where the male determining gene ends up on an X chromosome. And beyond that, you have what are now called variations in sex development, or DSDs. That's the preferred umbrella term for what used to be called intersex conditions.
Like androgen insensitivity, things like that?
Exactly. These variations can lead to ambiguous physical characteristics, where the internal or external anatomy doesn't fit the typical definition of male or female. And the critical takeaway here is that given this biological diversity, for the church to just state there are only two sexes, to justify its binary, it's just factually inaccurate. It ignores a significant portion of humanity.
And once science proves the binary model is flawed, society has to ask how to update its laws, its forms, even its language, which is where the legal systems come in. The sources use the German Federal Constitutional Court as a kind of cultural shockwave.
Oh, it's a perfect example of secular law just completely outpacing theological dogma.
Yeah.
The German court already recognizes three genders: female, male, and diverse.
Diverse.
And this wasn't just some philosophical statement. It had immediate practical effects on how the state identifies its citizens. It required three gender options on official documents, and crucially, it impacted language. German is a highly gendered language.
And you mentioned the colon in German Mitarbeiter.in as a pause for respect.
Yes. Inclusive language in German has evolved, and the colon is now used to signal this pause for respect. It's designed to acknowledge non-binary people who don't identify as male, Mitarbeiter, or female, Mitarbeiterin. It's a linguistic change that's legally recognized, and it just shows this massive cultural shift toward recognizing diversity.
Which puts immense pressure on the church curia. The draft describes it as this exclusively male club that's so used to writing "Dear colleagues" because there are no women.
They're still struggling to even acknowledge the second gender women, while the constitutional courts are already focused on the third, non-binary gender.
It's the ultimate friction point.
Absolutely. The church has to find a way to honor the dignity of all, not just in theory, but in its language, its structure, its daily life, all while facing this intense internal resistance from those who insist on the old binary framework.
Okay, so biological diversity sets the scientific stage. But it's the sociological arguments from thinkers like Simone de Beauvoir and Judith Butler that really dismantle the church's traditional gender roles.
Okay.
Let's start with the Beauvoir's famous concept from 1949.
The Beauvoir's quote, "One is not born a woman, one becomes one," from the second sex. I mean, it's revolutionary. It fundamentally separates biology from social destiny. She argued that being biologically female doesn't automatically assign you a specific destiny or role or even a psychological state.
It's civilization and culture that shape what's considered feminine, not nature.
Precisely. The idea that women are gentle or nurturing or inherently better at certain things, she says that's all culture. She details how cultural practices, laws, education, religious dogma, they all socialize individuals into these gender roles.
Example.
The physical fact that women bear children is given the cultural meaning that women belong in the home. That assignment of meaning is social construction, and that, in turn, impacts power. This insight just opened the floodgates for the second wave of feminism to challenge patriarchy.
And then in 1990, Judith Butler takes that concept and radicalizes it even further in Gender Trouble. She starts to question not just the roles, but the fundamental stability of man and woman as categories.
Butler's thesis is profound, and it's often misunderstood. She argues that man and woman are basically social categories that are inscribed onto bodies to make gender seem natural in the first place. For Butler, gender isn't a fixed internal state of being. It's a constantly recreated performative act.
So gender is what you do, not what you are. The actions, the gestures.
It is. You perform gender through your clothes, your speech, your walk, your job choices, your emotions. These constant repetitive actions, this daily insistence on being seen as male or female, create the convincing appearance of a stable, innate identity.
But Butler says this performance is never neutral or free.
Never. It's constrained by what she calls the heteronormative matrix.
That's a key term. How does that matrix secure the power structure?
The matrix is the societal expectation that the man-woman binary, which is linked to heterosexual reproduction, is the only universal norm. And it's enforced through constant societal pressure, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent. The power structure is secured by exclusion.
So by defining others as deviant.
Exactly. By defining people who fall outside that narrow norm, trans individuals, gay couples, gender nonconforming people, as deviants or unnatural or ideological, the binary order is cemented.
So the church's resistance to gender theory actually validates Butler's point. The system defines deviance to secure its own power.
Absolutely. Butler suggests the division into men and women is ultimately a necessary tool for maintaining specific hierarchies and power relations. And the draft document notes that for the church to just dismiss this as mere ideology without understanding its deep, critical analysis of power, well, that's to miss the entire challenge.
Okay, so the sociological theories lay the intellectual groundwork. Now we need to see how these ideas collided with the institutional church. We can track the resistance through what the sources divide into 4 distinct waves of feminism.
And this overview provides a really crucial historical context. It shows this relationship where the church has reacted, sometimes defensively, sometimes with dialogue, but consistently until now, setting very clear boundaries on who holds power. Hashtag tag 2.1, the 4 waves of feminism and Catholic interaction.
The first wave, late 19th and early 20th century, focused on the basics, the right to education, the right to vote.
And the church hierarchy was explicitly hostile to even these basic demands. You see it in the public statements of figures like Pope Pius X in the early 1900s. He said women could never be the equals of men and called those seeking political involvement eccentrics.
Wow.
So while official Catholic organizations were kept in traditional roles, like charity work, you had figures like Hedwig Dransfeld in Germany showing internal dissent, campaigning for suffrage from within the Catholic political party. The church was trying to hold the line, but the line was already breaking.